Hello everyone, and welcome to our brand new series where we will make a Quest and Dialog system in Godot 4 and GDScript. In this series, we will create a system where we will be able to interact with multiple NPCs in our world. When interacting with these NPCs, our player will be presented with a dialog box. Once the dialog box is shown, they will be able to interact with this box to make a series of choices. Different choices will lead to different responses from our NPC. Each NPC will also have their own unique dialogues and responses to choose from. They will also be able to give our player quests. Certain quests will only be available at certain points in our dialogue, and these quests will be made out of a series of objectives. To complete these objectives, we will need to interact with other NPCs as well as quest items in our world. After we've completed all of our objectives, the quest will be complete and we will receive rewards. Okay, so this series will be broken into 10 manageable steps, and in each step we will focus on building each component of the system on its own. Before we get into creating the system, let's go over the components that we need to make. We'll start with our dialog system. In our dialog system, we'll need to make 5 components. These components consist of a structured storage method, which will store all of our dialogues, a dialog component, which will load our dialog data from the storage, a UI component, which will display the loaded data from the dialog component in the form of readable texts and buttons with responses, a dialog manager component that manages the back end of our dialog interactions, including state and branch transitions that will change depending on the player's choices, and then of course an NPC component which will allow for continuous interaction with our player. Now, before we move on to our quest component, I'd like to discuss our storage method a little bit first. In our system, we will use JSON to store our dialog data. This data will include the dialog state, text, and options for the different branches of dialogues that are assigned to each NPC. For example, if we have 2 NPCs named Bella and Mortimer, each of them will have their own section in the JSON file containing all of their dialog branches. When we interact with Bella, the system will check her dialog state and play the correct dialog from the appropriate branch. The same will apply to Mortimer. We can also customize our player's responses and determine which dialog should play based on our chosen response. Now, the reason I wanted to focus on this is because I know someone is going to ask, why didn't you use a resource instead of JSON? Well, I initially did build a dialog system using a resource component that could be added and edited in the NPC's inspector panel, but after adding too many branches and responses, everything became really cluttered. So I decided to go with JSON purely because in my opinion, it's easier to manage. But don't worry, because we won't be using a JSON file for our quest system, we will be using resource components instead. Now, speaking of the quest system, let's have a look at all of its components. In our quest system, we will need to create 5 main components. These components consist of a resource component that will create and store each of our quests, objectives, and rewards, a quest manager component, which will manage our quest state, and it will handle the fetching, updating, and removal of quests and objectives, a UI component to show our quest log and quest tracker, a quest item component for when the objective requires our player to collect X amount of items to complete an objective, and then of course an NPC component which will not only give quests to our player, but also update quests if the objective requires our player to talk to another NPC. Aside from that, we obviously need to integrate our player component, which will be able to interact with our world. I also want to go over the logic flow between our quest and dialog system before we start building it so that we can get an idea of how these components connect together. When our player interacts with an NPC component, we will use the Dialog Manager component to show the dialog on the screen. It will do this by fetching the dialog data from the NPC component and then casting it to the Dialog UI component. The NPC component gets the dialog data from our Dialog component. During our dialog interaction, our player will be required to make decisions. When they select a dialog option to make a decision, the Dialog Manager component will update the state of the dialog and fetch the next appropriate dialog response. If one of the options that we chose is to accept a quest, then the NPC component will give our player all of the available quests that they have on that current dialog branch. It will do this by fetching the data from the Quest Resource component and passing it to our Quest Manager component, which will then update our Quest UI component to show our quest, objectives, rewards, and other details. After we've accepted a few quests, we will then be able to go around our world and complete the objectives required for our quest. If all objectives are completed, the Quest Manager and Player components will update the quest state, UI, and give our player a reward. And that basically is the whole loop and connection system between our quest, dialog, player, and NPC components. So, in essence, the player interacts with the NPC and the world. The Dialog Manager handles dialog interactions, and the Quest Manager manages quests and objectives. The UI components update the user interface to reflect the current state of our objectives, quests, and dialogues. Don't worry if none of this made sense, because you will see the logic unfold once we start building it. Hopefully you now have a general idea of what we're going to be building, how it's going to work, and what each component of the system's purpose will be. You can find the link to this Excalidraw board in the description box below if you want to go over it, or if you just want to use it for your own project. Before I end this video, I just want to give you a small warning that this series involves a lot of coding. I know most of you will probably be okay with that, but I know there are a select few individuals who might not fully comprehend how big a quest and dialog system is. It is not a small mechanic to implement, so just know that I warned you.
I warned you, but you didn't listen!
Now, let's end this video here and move on to the next part where we will set up our project. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.